Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and we have officially made it to NFL roster cutdown day. If you're listening on the audio podcast platforms, I think you have 12 hours until rosters had to be cut down from 90 men to 53 men. And if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook Live, well, you have less than 24 hours for NFL teams to, again, cut their rosters down from 90 total men to 53. And we're going to dive into all of that today, especially trying to figure out who is going to make the Niners roster, who is going to get cut off the Niners roster, and which players might be on the practice squad when it's all said and done. If you kindly would like, share, subscribe. What's up, Raphael562 Niners in the comments. Hope you're having a wonderful, what is it, Monday now? The days are going by so fast. But without further ado, let's dive into the San Francisco 49ers 2024 53-man roster prediction. We do have some small news off the top because players like Ricky Pearsall, Isaac Yiadom, and Spencer Burford all returned to practice today. A really good sign for the receiver room, cornerback room, and the offensive line depth behind the top five starters. Also, linebacker D. Winters and edge rushers Leonard Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos did not practice today. Floyd is considered day-to-day. Gross-Matos is considered week-to-week, and it is unknown how long D. Winters could be ruled out. So maybe some potential roster construction changes happening because of those injuries. And San Francisco has already cut 5 players off their roster. Receiver John Trey Kirkland, running backs Matt Breida and Keyshawn Vaughn, and guard Lewis Kidd, along with punter Presley Harvin III. So with that out of the way, let's predict the San Francisco 49ers 2024 53-man roster, starting with the quarterback position. This is, I think, one of the clear-cut, easiest positional groups to predict on the roster. Obviously, Brock Purdy is this team's starting franchise quarterback, going to pay him a crap ton of money after this year is over with. And behind Brock Purdy, you have Brandon Allen and Joshua Dobbs making the roster. Not exactly sure who is going to be the clear-cut, bona fide number 2 quarterback. I think it might change on a week-to-week basis, depending on who San Francisco is playing in the upcoming game. But I think the top 3 quarterbacks are kind of set in stone: Brock Purdy, Brandon Allen, and Joshua Dobbs. I also believe Tanner Mordecai, rookie out of Wisconsin, I think they want to keep him on the practice squad, knowing the injury history under Kyle Shanahan's regime with the quarterback position. It might behoove him to retain a 4th quarterback in case of emergency. So the quarterbacks this year will be Brock Purdy, Joshua Dobbs, and Brandon Allen, with Tanner Mordecai being on the practice squad. Moving along here to the running back position, I think San Francisco will keep 4 running backs and 1 fullback. The fullback is obvious. He's the only one rostered, that being Kyle Juszczyk, but I think they're going to keep 5 total tailbacks. Christian McCaffrey, Offensive Player of the Year last year. He and Kyle Juszczyk will be your 2 halfback and fullback starters. Behind them, though, I think Jordan Mason will be this team's running back number 2, with Elijah Mitchell and rookie Isaac Guerendo being there not just in case of emergency, but ultimately I think there will be this rotation behind Christian McCaffrey. Kyle Shanahan said in the offseason, leading into training camp, they want to not exactly limit, but almost keep Christian McCaffrey fresh. And I think having Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason, and Isaac Guerendo behind him, all being utilized in some form or fashion, would definitely keep Christian McCaffrey healthy, especially when you want to limit his snaps in between the tackles. For Elijah Mitchell, I don't see him getting cut, nor do I see him getting traded, but I do see Isaac Guerendo eventually supplanting him as this team's RB number 3, while he becomes this team's primary kick returner. The practice squad, though, I think is where many fans have their focus, is because Cody Schrader, it's always tough to judge a running back in the preseason. Most running backs are playing behind backup offensive linemen who are not going to be rostered this year or any year. That being said, Cody Schrader, I think, was kind of a victim of playing behind players like Nick Zakel. I think it's Isaac. I'm forgetting his last name, but Drake Nugent. Other players that maybe are more prone to be good pass blockers, not run blockers. I think Cody Schrader was kind of a victim of that, mainly running behind Jalen Moore for 2 games and Colton McKivitz for a couple games. It wasn't exactly what you wanted from a running back because the offensive line really wasn't that great for him. But I think Cody Schrader becomes a practice squad piece. I think he becomes an emergency kick returner. Let's say if Guerendo or Cowing happen to go down. But also, I believe Matt Breida, who was already released this morning, becomes the veteran practice squad running back. That way, in case Mitchell goes down, which has happened plenty of times, or on the off chance, fingers crossed, doesn't happen, Christian McCaffrey goes down, you have a vet that knows the offense, knows the system that Kyle Shanahan would be more comfortable going to compared to Isaac Guerendo or Cody Schrader. But there you have it so far. Quarterbacks, Brock Purdy, Brandon Allen, Joshua Dobbs. Practice squad, Tanner Mordecai for the quarterbacks. Running backs, Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, Elijah Mitchell, and Isaac Guerendo, with Kyle Juszczyk being your starting all-pro fullback, and Cody Schrader and Matt Breida being on the practice squad, which takes us to the receiver room. We already have comments here from Niner Gang 209 saying, I hope Ricky can stay healthy. What's up, Papa J? Hope you're having a wonderful Monday. And yes, that brings us to the receiver room that actually has 2 big questions, both of them being Brandon Aiyuk and the health of Ricky Pearsall. I'm still of the mindset that Brandon Aiyuk gets re-signed or at least plays on the 5th-year option. I'm not buying into him getting traded to Pittsburgh or Washington, although the avenues for those outcomes are definitely still open, unfortunately. But then Ricky Pearsall, back at practice today for the first time, I think, in 2 weeks. Didn't play a single snap in the preseason. So some big questions there as to, are you going to have Aiyuk and can Ricky Pearsall stay healthy? But that's not going to really change my predictions for the 53-man roster, mainly at the wide receiver position. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, and Jawan Jennings are going to be your 3 starting wide receivers. Behind them is going to be Ricky Pearsall, Chris Conley, and Jacob Cowing. You're not going to cut 2 rookies who you drafted this year, especially a first-round pick. Maybe Ricky Pearsall goes on IR, but with him back at practice today, it doesn't look likely. And on the practice squad, we're going to have Ronnie Bell, Trent Taylor, and Tay Martin, with Chris Conley beating out all 3 of them to stay on the active 53-man roster. I think Chris Conley will be the starting X receiver opposite Deebo and Jawan Jennings if Brandon Aiyuk is not healthy or active or is playing elsewhere. Week 1 of the NFL season, I think Chris Conley adds value that Ronnie Bell and Trent Taylor and Tay Martin simply do not have. Really good on special teams, great gunner on punt returns, and can actually give you some value playing and starting in this offense. I think he would have been many's unsung hero of the Super Bowl had San Francisco brought that thing home last year. And I think players like Ronnie Bell, Trent Taylor are going to kind of be the pseudo punt returner potential players. I don't see a future in which either one of them does much this season, but I think at the moment you do want to keep Ronnie Bell. There is a path to playing this year for Bell, and it actually has to do with Brandon Aiyuk. If Brandon Aiyuk, let's say, is playing elsewhere, now I think there is an opportunity for Bell to make the roster. If a trade goes through and it doesn't include a Terry McLaurin or another receiver, I think Chris Conley would start, and I think Ronnie Bell would actually make the 53-man roster. But in my predictions, Aiyuk is staying. I also think if there's an injury, Ronnie Bell is the first person you call upon. I go back to last year, although it was a long time ago, when Aiyuk got injured against the Rams, I think in week number 2, Bell was the replacement. Bell then started against the Giants in week number 3, caught his first career touchdown pass, and again, a long time ago, but I do think Ronnie Bell's willingness and ability to block will give him the edge up on maybe being a common practice squad elevation if somebody gets injured. Trent Taylor is simply there for the vibes and being a punt returner that can at least catch the football, while Tay Martin is a ball skilled, if you will, receiver that can go up and get it in the off chance this season turns into a version of 2020 where everybody goes down with injury, but I hope that's not the case. I do think there is a distinct possibility that Danny Gray goes to IR. Didn't practice today, didn't play in the preseason finale against the Las Vegas Raiders. I understand many folks are saying cut bait. He's not very good. He's a bust. I've gone back and forth with outright cutting him. San Francisco would save about $800,000 if they do cut him, which maybe you can sign an edge rusher with that money, but that's going to be a low level, not really even a key depth piece, just like, hey, stick around for a couple months. So the money really isn't worth it. And for Danny Gray, if you're the Niners and you don't have to cut him and you have an avenue to retain him, don't forget next offseason, let's say Brandon Aiyuk plays on the 5th-year option this year, which I don't think is likely, but it certainly is a possibility. You walk into next year likely not having Aiyuk on the roster. You maybe have to trade Deebo if you want to reassign Aiyuk. There is many avenues and possibilities where not that you really want to keep Danny Gray, but you may just want to have that body in the room on the off chance you have to move off of one of your star receivers. But alas, I think Danny Gray's probably going to get placed on season-ending IR before cut down day tomorrow. It's the quickest, easiest way to retain a player that really isn't going to miss the full season, but you're not really going to use, but actually is injured, didn't practice today. So I think there is an avenue for Danny Gray to stay on the roster, but albeit on the injured reserve. I don't see players like John Trey Kirkland, who was already cut, making the roster. I have a hard time buying into, let me see here on the Niners website, players, like Trent Taylor and Frank Darby and Robbie Chosen Anderson making the roster, albeit I do have Ronnie Bell, Trent Taylor, and Tay Martin being on the practice squad, which brings us to tight ends. If you're counting so far, we have 6 receivers, 5 running backs, which includes Kyle Juszczyk as a fullback, and 3 quarterbacks, bringing our total to, 14 total players, and moving us to tight end. I've gone back and forth on tight ends a lot, and I hate to say this, I spent too much time trying to figure out what exactly San Francisco is going to do at the tight end position. Obviously, George Kittle is safe. Eric Saubert is your tight end number 2 this season, but what exactly is San Francisco going to do with the tight end 3 and tight end 4 spots on the depth chart? Despite his really poor preseason, I do think Braden Willis is kind of a lock to make the roster. So what happens with tight end number 4? Is that Jake Tunges, an undrafted free agent a couple years ago, signed this offseason to San Francisco and had a pretty nice training camp overall. I think had a pretty good preseason. Wasn't phenomenal, but as a tight end 4, you're kind of just looking for not being called for penalties and knowing the offense and having somewhat consistent hands. That has been Jake Tunges. I don't think Mason Pline is good enough, nor do I really think he's worth taking a chance on the practice squad unless somebody else picks up Jake Tunges. Then there's Cameron Latu, who I have a hate-hate relationship with, if you will. His last preseason game was by far his best performance of his career thus far. But I'm just not sure exactly if he's worth keeping around. Yes, he's 6'5". Yes, he has the frame, 6'5", 245 pounds. The body is built for the NFL, but it doesn't seem like he knows how to use it just yet. There are still lapses in his play, whether he knows the offense or not. And so I get being a former third round pick. You'd like to think he's only in year number 2 and really his second full preseason of play, never having played an actual football game in the regular season last year due to tearing his meniscus. I would hope and love if he'd be a practice squad player, but I'm not exactly sure he would go through waivers because of that. Although I would not do this, I think the tight ends this year are George Kittle as your number 1, Eric Saubert as your number 2, Braden Willis as your number 3, and Cameron Latu as your number 4. The other weird kind of wrinkle in all of this is Logan Thomas, who was re-signed before or just after San Francisco's preseason game against the Raiders. I know Kyle Shanahan wanted him back. He's coming back off an injury. I'm not sure if maybe he's a PUP candidate, an IR candidate. They signed him early in the offseason, cut him during training camp in the preseason, then re-signed him. So I'm not exactly sure what to do with Logan Thomas. We haven't really seen him at all in the offense. I know he knows it playing in Washington for a long time. Former quarterback, obviously a smart player, but having not seen him, I know he's a veteran. I know maybe there's an off chance they want to kind of hide him and keep him. I doubt he'd be a practice squad player as a vet. I don't have him making the roster, but by default, because I haven't seen him actually play on the current roster, he's practiced a handful of times, but even then, he hasn't practiced a lot because of injury. So I'm not really sure what to do with Logan Thomas. He could make the roster. He may not. But having not seen him, I do not have him making the roster. I think your tight ends this year are Kittle, Saubert, Willis, and Cameron Latu, with Jake Tunn just being the lone practice squad tight end. Again, with the re-signing of Logan Thomas kind of being a wrinkle to all of this, that brings us to the offensive linemen. And we have a comment here by Eldon M. Paul Sr. saying he thinks Drake Nugent, undrafted free agent out of Michigan, and Jarrett Kingston earned a roster spot on the offensive line as well. Don't know if they'll keep him. Hopefully they can trade Latu. He wouldn't make it to the practice squad. The Latu thing is certainly a confusing one. There's so many avenues and angles and paths to take with Cameron Latu, but sticking with the offensive line for a second, in my opinion, I would prefer outright cutting Cameron Latu and keeping an extra offensive lineman. I'd rather have 10 offensive linemen than 4 tight ends, but that's just me. Obviously, your starters are locked in place. Although Trent Williams has not returned to the team just yet, I think they're going to get something done with him, and he will be there against the New York Jets in week number 1 and blocking Brock Purdy's backside. Aaron Banks will be healthy enough by week 1 to play. Hopefully he practiced or I think he did individual drills on the side today. So a good sign there. Jake Brendel is your starting center. Rookie Dominic Pooney is your starting right guard, and Colton McKivitz is your starting right tackle. This was one of the more tougher positions to predict because John Feliciano is already on injured reserve. Going to miss probably 4 to 6 weeks. He'll come back in the early portion of the season, but likely become a depth piece unless Dominic Pooney or Aaron Banks go down or struggle during the season, which leaves us with Jalen Moore, Spencer Burford, Jarrett Kingston, and Chris Hubbard being your backups. I know in that grouping, there is no backup center. That's why the tight end position is so confusing to me. Again, I would outright cut Cam Latu, but you have to have 53 men, and there were too many other players I wanted to keep. Nick Zakelj and Ben Barch are your practice squad offensive linemen this year, which again, keeping Nick Zakelj as the backup center or Ben Barch as the backup center may make San Francisco lean that way. It makes sense. And Drake Nugent, I just couldn't find a spot for him, although he was really good this year. They gave, I think, a little bit of guaranteed money to Ben Barch and Nick Zakelj, being Brock Purdy's former roommate, having played primarily guard and backup center throughout the training camp and preseason. I think they want to keep both of those players. I don't know if someone else would pick up Drake Nugent. Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. I have a hard time believing Drake Nugent actually makes any NFL roster in his first year, but could be a player like Jason Poe in previous seasons that kind of bounces around from practice squad to practice squad, but ultimately in year 4 or 5 can be a depth piece and play in the NFL for a long time, which could inevitably bring him back to San Francisco next year. I just couldn't find a place for him on the practice squad. And I think you want to keep as much talent on the practice squad this year that you can. And not just like, oh, they're a talented player, but ultimately guys you believe in can actually step up and step in if someone else goes down. I don't love Jalen Moore being this team's backup left tackle. Maybe they cut Moore and put Chris Hubbard over there, but then you don't have a backup tackle. Maybe Jarrett Kingston becomes the backup right tackle. Then you keep a player like Zakel on the active roster with Drake Nugent being on the practice squad. There's so many ways you can look at this. I'm not sure if maybe Burford is active on week 1 because of the hand injury. Maybe he's a later IR addition, but he practiced today. So again, there's so many ways to look at the offensive line and take it. I went with the most basic way, which was Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Dominic Pooney, Colton McKivitz as your starting 5. Then players like Jalen Moore as your backup left tackle, Spencer Burford kind of being your right guard, with Jarrett Kingston and Chris Hubbard being your right tackle and left guard in Kingston case as a backup until John Feliciano returns. We have a question here by Rick Diaz. He said, did you know that we're the past 7 or 8 years we've been going to this year after year before the season starts, players are going to get hurt. This is annoying. I don't know. You're right, Rick. Players get hurt. You don't know. That's why you have to keep as much talent on the practice squad as you can. Moving along here to the defensive line, the opposite side of the trenches. This to me is all based and determined on the health of Leonard Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos. Both those players seem to have avoided, serious injury against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Leonard Floyd one was much more concerning, yet somehow, I guess due to his ability to keep himself in tip-top shape, is only day to day, a really good sign for his health come week 1 against the New York Jets. Yetur Gross-Matos is week to week, so I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do with him, but ultimately, I think your starting defensive line is as clear-cut as it's ever been. Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, and Leonard Floyd are your starting 4 defensive linemen. Your backups, I think, are also pretty clear-cut. Yetur Gross-Matos, Kevin Givens, Jordan Elliott, and Robert Beal Jr. I do have San Francisco with 2 players on injured reserve. Kalia Davis as one who I believe they want to actually bring back after his stint is over with. Then there is Drake Jackson, who will not even play this year, which brings us to the practice squad, which the Niners, to me, need to go and acquire a backup edge rusher, mainly because Floyd and Gross-Matos' health is not iffy, but just uncertain at the moment. Floyd being much more durable in the past. I think he's played 108 straight games, so I wouldn't be too concerned, but he's got nicked up twice during training camp and already got hurt, I think, in his second or third drive of the preseason. So you definitely want to have him out there and hopefully healthy, but still, I don't love the edge rushing depth that we currently have. I like Gross-Matos as this unproven high upside player that you hope Chris Kosar gets the most out of. Then you get to somebody like Robert Beal Jr. I'm of the belief that Alex Barrett makes the practice squad on an off chance, maybe makes the active roster. I have UDFA Evan Anderson, defensive tackle, making the practice squad. They paid him a lot of money, guaranteed money, to be on to sign as a UDFA this year. So I think they're going to want to retain him, at least on the practice squad. I went back and forth between Jonathan Garvin and T.Y. McGill as my final practice squad defensive lineman. I mean, man, Man, uh, I would lean towards T.Y. McGill simply because he's been in the system for a couple years now. But ultimately, knowing San Francisco needs edge rushing depth because of injuries to Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos, um, man, I think it would behoove San Francisco to keep Jonathan Garvin, or, in my opinion, try to go sign an edge rusher. There's a guy in New York for the Jets named Jalen Holmes. Played 5 years in the NFL. Was a Viking in previous seasons. Was a Jet last year. Being a Jet, knows the defense. Robert Saleh, Chris Kosaric, ton of ties there. Not going to have the stat line and box score you love, but ultimately, if they cut him, he's almost 300 pounds. He plays the outside, and he's an edge rusher. He's 6'5". Definitely has the potential to be something more of an effort guy than a traits kind of player. But that's kind of a long shot. I have no idea what the Jets are going to do with him. But if they cut him, if I was San Francisco, I'd look towards trying to sign or trade for Jalen Holmes of the New York Jets. Ironically, San Francisco's opponent week 1 of the NFL season. But if they don't want to do that or go that route, I would try to bring back Jonathan Garvin. You need to have edge rushing depth. You never know when somebody's going to go down. And San Francisco is very top heavy this year on the defensive line. On the edges, not really much to like and love. In previous years, it was Arden Key and Charles Omenihu and a younger Drake Jackson, Robert Beal Jr. last year. Kerry Hyder was a depth piece for a little bit of time. This year, it's much more Yetur Gross-Matos, Robert Beal, then a bunch of guys that are either vets or journeymen or players you're not really sure of. I would almost be guaranteed they're going to look elsewhere to bring somebody else in. But if they don't, I would not be shocked if they keep Alex Barrett and Jonathan Garvin on the practice squad, elevating them on a week-to-week basis. Other than that, I love Kevin Givens. I love Jordan Elliott. And that takes us to the linebacker position. This one, quarterback's pretty clear-cut. Receiver, to me, is pretty clear-cut. The offensive line is kind of tricky. We already talked about that. The linebacker position is kind of in the same category of any way you cut it, there's things to like and things to dislike in the group. Ultimately, the linebackers I chose to make the rosters was Fred Warner and Devondre Campbell. Those are going to be your 2 starters on week 1. Obviously, all-pro Fred going nowhere. He's the best linebacker in football for a reason. Devondre Campbell, you signed to be the vet to hold the fort down while Dre Greenlaw recovers. Dre Greenlaw probably going to start the season on the PUP list or injured reserve, depending on how San Francisco wants to utilize him later in the season. Likely not going to come back until the middle of the year, but when he does come back, this room will likely change. But even by that point, it's so late in the season, guys are going to get dinged up and injured, so it may not matter at that point in time. That said, your starters are Fred Warner and Devondre Campbell Sr. Your backups are D. Winters, who is currently injured, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. Time will obviously tell. Then behind D. Winters, who I think had a phenomenal preseason, I have Curtis Robinson being this team's backup Mike linebacker, beating out Demetrius Flanagan-Falls for the 53-man roster veteran spot. Then behind Curtis Robinson, I have rookie and 7th-round pick Tatum Bethune actually being on the 53-man active roster. You can argue back and forth whether Bethune can be, a practice squad player for a year or two. That's certainly a viable option. I'm not exactly sure if he would make it past waivers. I think he had a really good preseason. I believe he led the entire team in tackles, which ultimately doesn't mean much, but also can tell you he's always around the football. Whereas players behind him like Demetrius Flanagan-Falls, who he's more of a react player, not a read player. For a linebacker, you want him to have those instincts, read the quarterback's eyes and, have the speed, have the, play with this tenacity and the electricity that Bethune plays with, like the Winters plays with, where yes, they'll make mistakes, but ultimately you can live through those mistakes if it means they're a better player down the road. That's not Demetrius Flanagan-Falls. I get he has guaranteed money tied to his contract, which is why I think he'll be back on the practice squad this year. He's a really good special teamer. And I think in the first couple of weeks of the NFL season, while yes, we are predicting the 53-man roster leading into cutdown day, we all know that these rosters are never truly solidified. That's why I think DFF becomes a practice squad player and will probably see himself activated or elevated, a lot during the season, because this team is going to need special teams help, because that new kickoff rule is not going to work in San Francisco's favor. Then behind DFF, I have Jalen Graham. I think Jalen Graham still has a lot of potential. He, I think, could be a good practice squad player, and the hope is that once Dre Greenlaw comes back, you have players like Fred Warner, Greenlaw, and Devondre Campbell then rotate, and ultimately Greenlaw takes his spot back next to Fred Warner. By that time, you're hoping D. Winters has kind of ascended to the linebacker 3 and 2 position, pushing Devondre Campbell further and further down the depth chart, which in next year, hopefully you can bring back Dre Greenlaw for a cheaper contract if he shows signs of being the same player he was pre-injury. And you have Fred and Dre Greenlaw and D. Winters and Tatum Bethune and Jalen Graham, who I think, could be a practice squad player, but also comes downhill so fast that you almost want him to be a goal line linebacker. But that said, you have too many players like him already on the roster. You're going to eventually have Malik Mustafa, Jair Brown, and Talanoa Fungal healthy at the same time. You could use 3 safety sets at the goal line with 3 safeties that want to get at it and want to get crazy, almost making Jalen Graham, who was kind of a nickelback safety linebacker hybrid, kind of redundant. But again, I think he's a practice squad player going into year number 2. I don't think any other team is going to be like, I want Jalen Graham on my active roster week by week. So I think he'll make it past waivers and ultimately be a practice squad player next to Demetrius Flanagan-Falls. Moving to the cornerback position, if you're counting in your head, going back to quarterbacks, 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 6 receivers, 4 tight ends, 9 offensive linemen, could be 10. We shall see. 8 defensive linemen. Would not be shocked if they keep 10 offensive linemen and 9 defensive linemen. Cut a tight end and maybe even cut a safety out of the room. Then there's linebackers with 5, bringing us down to cornerbacks. I have them carrying 6 cornerbacks on the active roster this year. John Neville's asked before we get to cornerbacks, can Curtis Robinson have an Aziz Al-Shire type ascension? I wouldn't bank on that. I don't think he'll play a lot, but he was taking first-team reps in training camp next to Fred Warner and next to Devondre Campbell. I think Curtis Robinson will be this team's backup Mike linebacker on the off chance Fred Warner goes down or needs a breather for a snap or two. I would bank on D. Winters having a better ascension, if you will, but ultimately, I like Curtis Robinson, been here for a handful of seasons, knows the defense. Definitely a higher upside, safer pick than Demetrius Flanagan-Falls is, which again is why I think Curtis Robinson makes the roster over a player like DFF. Going back to cornerbacks, though, obviously you have Mooney Ward. He's a lock. Diamé Lenore, he's a lock. I think Isaac Yiadom and Renardo Green are both locks. Yiadom maybe the starter going into week 1. I am kind of leaning towards starting Renardo Green, who I think was really good during preseason. He's young. He'll make mistakes like most rookies, but ultimately I think showed you enough to where if you wanted to play a younger player in the secondary, I think he'll learn fast. He'll be a really good run defender. And again, if Isaac Yiadom, who did practice today, maybe isn't healthy enough by week 1, I could easily see Renardo Green starting against the New York Jets alongside Ward and Lenore. But that said, typed into my starting category, penciled in here is Mooney Ward, Lenore, and Isaac Yiadom. Behind them, Renardo Green being the first man off the bench. Then behind Renardo Green, who I think will serve as this outside cornerback, nickelback hybrid, kind of along the lines of a Diamador Lenore early in his career. They've already talked about trying to teach Green to play nickel a lot. I think that'll kind of be his spot on the roster. I think he'll also help with matchups, how you want to play certain things. If maybe a team doesn't have a great, slot receiver, has a bigger bodied slot receiver, maybe we do see a player like Lenore go outside and Green can play nickel. But obviously, that'll be a week by week basis. Behind Green, though, on the depth chart, I have Rock Ya-Sin making the roster. I think while even I said walking into this year, didn't love him, everyone was talking him up. I was very skeptical of him actually being not a centerpiece, but a piece on the roster. He looked really strong against the Raiders and the Saints and the Titans. He was breaking up passes. He was making some tackles. And I think ultimately, he's a player that fights throughout the entire play, whereas players that'll get cut behind him, mainly Samuel Womack, I do think at times are kind of like, oh, the play's over with, guy caught the ball, what do I do? I think Rock Ya-Sin is a vet. If something goes haywire or Mooney Ward goes down, or on the off chance you lose Jada Man Ward, you're going to see a lot of Rock Ya-Sin this year. This team has been looking for a number 4 cornerback that's a vet for a long time. They've had Mooney Ward, they've had Lenore, and Ambry Thomas the last few years be their starters. Even within them being one of the better 3 starting cornerback trios in football, they've always been looking for that backup 4th cornerback. In previous years, mainly a decade, it was Dante Johnson. Then it was Jason Verrett in recent history. And even last year, Verrett was on the roster playing snaps on Christmas against the Ravens. He got burnt, then ultimately got injured, then got cut again. So I think Rock Ya-Sin gives them exactly what they're looking for. Yes, you have Bernardo Green this year. He'll be your 4th cornerback, but in a weird way, Rock Ya-Sin also becomes a more stable 5th cornerback option. He's played for about 4 or 5 years in the NFL with the Colts, former 2nd-round pick, also with the Ravens last year. He's a solid enough player that if someone goes down, you're not going to love him being out there. Nobody likes their 5th cornerback starting, but it'll give you a higher floor and a much lower ceiling than, say, a player like Samuel Womack, who I think doesn't make the roster. In fact, I don't even have Samuel Womack being on the practice squad this year. I think he wouldn't make it through waivers. He's a young player. I think another team would like to have him on their team, mainly a team like the Vikings or maybe a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who already lost Ron Bland for a long time. So I think that Womack gets cut, doesn't make the roster, isn't a practice squad player. I think Rock Ya-Sin and Darrell Luter Jr. beat him out. Then I have Chase Lucas, who has nearly 300 special teams snaps making the practice squad. I think there is a case to be made that if you want to keep Darrell Luter Jr., maybe you'd opt to cut Rock Ya-Sin and have him be your veteran practice squad player. But I'm not entirely certain after the preseason that he had that a team wouldn't scoop up Rock Ya-Sin, which is why I lean towards Chase Lucas being the practice squad elevation week by week special teams player. Really, really good one at that. And I think there is an opportunity once Talon Noah Hufanga comes back. You have players like George Odom, Curtis Robinson, and then you have players like Chase Lucas and Demetrius Flanagan Falls kind of being practice squad special team elevation players, which only makes your team stronger. There is a case also to be made that Darrell Luter Jr. isn't worth keeping. I would push back a lot on that. Going into year number 2, yes, there's ups and downs. There's broken coverages here and there, but Samuel Womack just wasn't that good. A lot of missed coverages. Although Womack is a lot better, I think, in run defense than Luter is. Luter is that bigger bodied outside cornerback where if you have someone, say like A.J. Brown, who is phenomenal. Maybe a team has Drake London or Keenan Allen, and let's say you're just you're at your cornerback room is just beaten up and broken. I'd much rather have Darrell Luter Jr., who would still probably get burnt over and over and over again by those said receivers, but ultimately his body would at least hold up, wouldn't get pushed back. And I think with time would actually learn a lot quicker. Don't forget, Samuel Womack was supposed to be this team's starting nickelback a handful of years ago in 2022. Showed some promise on special teams, was shown to be a pretty good gunner, then got hurt, then wasn't active for the majority of the season once he got healthy last year. I think his time is kind of over in San Francisco, and I think they're going to walk into this year with Mooney Ward, Lenore, Isaac Yadam, Renardo Green, Rock Yassin, and Darrell Luter Jr., a younger group than previous seasons with Green and Luter making the actual active roster. Then I think you have probably the deepest cornerback room under Kyle Shanahan, where they're not going to be, scavenging the other teams' practice squads or free agency hoping to find the depth piece. You're going to have a pretty good depth behind your starters, which is great to have for the first time in a long time, where in previous years you needed those guys. Manuel Mosley going down, Barrett going down, Sherman having injuries later in his career in San Francisco. You have depth to hopefully, keep you afloat if somebody else goes down, which brings us to safety. I think San Francisco is going to have 4 safeties on the active roster this year. I think Ambry Thomas will be a injured reserve player this year if he's not cut. It makes sense to put him on IR, retain his rights, and see where that goes. But going back to safety for a hot second, I think Jair Brown and George Odom will be your starting 2 safeties. You'll have Malik Mustafa and Tracy Walker as your backups. I really went back and forth with Jalen Mahoney or Tracy Walker being one of the backups. Ultimately, I think that the last thing San Francisco wants is, on the off chance, George Odom goes down, right? You don't want to have Mustafa and Jalen Mahoney, 2 young players, 2 rookies, a 4th-round pick, and an undrafted free agent being the next man up. Now, I do think that in the near future, there's going to be a conversation of, is Malik Mustafa the best safety on the roster? Whether it's week 8, whether it's week 16, whether it's next season, I think Mustafa has the potential to be better than Jair Brown pretty soon. And Jair Brown's a darn good safety, but I do think they're going to want that vet behind Jair Brown in case, you're going to see him play in the box a lot this year. You're going to see him try to make tackles in the backfield. We've already seen it against the Raiders and the Saints. Forced to fumble in 2 games so far in preseason, being a really good tackler. I think you want to have a vet behind him, kind of like the pseudo Tashawn Gibson this year. That'll be your George Odom, with Malik Mustafa serving as the Talanoa Hufanga, kind of like how Hufanga was early in his career behind Jimmy Ward and Jaquiski Tart. Then once Hufanga comes back, you cut Tracy Walker, and your 4 safeties this year are Jair Brown, George Odom, Mustafa, and Hufanga. That'll be later in the year, though. San Francisco is trying to decide whether to keep Hufanga on the active roster or ultimately put him on IR, give him more time to recover, which I think would be the smartest option. You never, ever, ever want to rush knee injuries back. Achilles with a Greenlaw, the ACL with Hufanga. You want to take your time with those. You never know. One cut and the guy's out for the entire year again, and the career's entirely changed. Play it safe, working back slowly. I think you have the bodies, you have the playmaking ability in the secondary to not have to rush Hufanga back. And if George Odom, by off chance, starts to struggle, start Malik Mustafa. See where it goes. You have Tracy Walker back there. He played for a long time in Detroit. They know what they're doing. But I think they'll carry 4 Safeties, Brown, Odom, Mustafa, and Walker. Jalen Mahoney, who quietly had a really good preseason, a really good training camp. I'm sure some of you were like, who is that guy? He was pretty good. Vanderbilt, defensive back, really good on special teams. I think ultimately, could maybe not be a vital piece, not even a backup, but I think there could be a future if he continues to progress and grow where he can be this team's fourth safety. He can be that kind of tweener cornerback, safety-like player where on the off chance you lose a couple cornerbacks or you lose two safeties, Mahoney could step in and be a younger safety. Keep in mind, Taylor Hawkins got cut earlier during the training camp preseason session, so he's not back on the team this year. I think they'll ride with Mahoney being the lone safety on the practice squad. Then once Hufanga comes back, Brown, Odom, Mustafa, and Hufanga, and maybe on the off chance you can trade Tracy Walker for a team that needs an accomplished veteran depth piece, bringing us to the final positional group on the roster. Can I ask you a question? Do you even care about the special teams unit? It's going to be Jake Moody, who was really good during the preseason. Fingers crossed that carries over into the regular season. Tabor Peppers, your long snapper again, and Mitch Wisnowski is your punter. That's pretty straightforward. Who cares? But that is your 53-man roster. 3 special teamers, kicker, punter, long snapper, 4 safeties, 6 cornerbacks, 5 linebackers, 8 defensive linemen, maybe some more, probably some more, 9 offensive linemen. I can see them carrying a 10th, 4 tight ends. I would keep 3. That's just me. That wasn't supposed to rhyme, but, well, I have the time. That was cringy. I apologize. 6 wide receivers, 5 running backs, and 3 quarterbacks. Your 2024 practice squad is Tanner Mordecai, Cody Schrader, Matt Breida, Ronnie Bell, Trent Taylor, Tay Martin, Jake Tungis, Ben Barch, Nick Zakel, Alex Barrett, Evan Anderson, Jonathan Garvin, Demetrius Flanagan Falls, and Jalen Graham, with Chase Lucas and Jalen Mahoney rounding out the 16-player practice squad. Tell me what you think down below of my 53-man predictions. The 6 receivers, again, if I can remind John Neville's here, it's Deebo, Aiyuk, Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Chris Conley, and Jacob Cowing. No particular order, just telling you who's going to make the roster. I think this is the best roster they can potentially fill and put out there on opening day. Obviously, not all 53 suit up. We shall see what week 1 looks like. Brandon Aiyuk still up in the air. Trent Williams still up in the air unless something broke while we're currently recording this. But ultimately, I think this is the best roster they can field. They may sign a player. They may trade a player away. I can see them trying to trade Tracy Walker. I can see them trying to trade either Nick Zakel or Ben Barch. Sometimes, if you have a player that is not going to pass through waivers, it's beneficial to you to ask other teams, can I have a 7th-round pick in exchange for XYZ player? Sometimes it works out. Go back a handful of years ago when this team traded Jonah Griffith to the Broncos for a 5th-round pick. You never know what other teams may want. If it were me and the Jets cut Jalen Holmes, I'm looking at him to be brought in to be another edge rusher. But that is it. That is your 2024 San Francisco 49ers 53-man roster prediction. It'll be a long comment, but drop your roster predictions down below. We are less than 24 hours away to roster cut day. They've already cut players like John Trey Kirkland, Matt Breida, Keyshawn Vaughn, Lewis Kidd, and Presley Harvin III. Many more to come in the next few days. It's an exciting time, also a sad time for the players that get cut. But we all know that even though a roster is set in stone for 53 players, doesn't mean it's actually set in stone. People are going to get cut, injured, waived, signed, and traded all year long. So stay tuned. The roster is going to change and be liquefied all year long. We know this. It's going to be a fun season. I hope, as John Nevels says here, did Danny Gray not playing in week 3 a sign of the team trying to keep him hidden? No, I think Danny Gray didn't practice today is going to go on IR. They're going to hope, fingers crossed, next year he clicks, but ultimately they just want to keep him around. Why would you not want to keep that speed around? Albeit it's not been great, been pretty bad. It's a body that you don't have to cut. Put him on IR, shelve him for another season. Hopefully he grows and improves his game in that time. But that was it. Send your roster predictions down below. Tell me what you think of mine. Was I wrong? Was I right? We'll obviously see tomorrow, I think 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is when roster cuts have to be finished. My name is Sterling Bennett. Kindly asking you to like, share, subscribe. Leave that review if you could. Follow us on social media at 49ers_access is the X, or Twitter. 49ers.access is the Instagram. If you want to watch the San Francisco 49ers play this year, go to SeatGeek.com. Find the seats you want, home or away game, does not matter. Get to the end. You're putting your card information in that box that says promo code. Type in 49ers access. 49 ERS ACCESS at SeatGeek.com. It'll save you $20 off your first purchase. And here's a trick. All you got to do is make a new email every single time you want to buy tickets. You can get a discount every single time. Isn't that fun? Free money's fun. I have the Upside app. Whenever I get gas, I get money back. It's great. It's great. I'm giving you free money. Use it. It'll help pay for that $16 beer at Levi Stadium. Maybe it'll even help pay Brandon Aiyuk's massive contract extension he'll hopefully get in the next few days or so. You never know. And if you could, kindly go to sportsspider.com. If you're like myself and you hate having to go through ESPN and Fox and Sporting News and NBC Sports, and you want all your Niners news in the same place, updated every single second, go to sportsspider.com. Latest articles, latest news, latest podcasts about your favorite teams all in the same place. Hit that link down below in the description or go to sportsspider.com. Have a really exciting announcement coming up in the next few days. If you love fantasy football and you love to make a little bit of money, you're going to want to stay tuned. Have some really fun stuff coming up in the next couple of days or so. Roster cuts are tomorrow, 1 p.m., August 27th. If you're listening on the podcasting platforms, they are today, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You're going to see a lot of players get cut. Tell me your predictions down below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave that review. And until next time, as always, stay faithful.